Is the resurrection of Jesus Christ true or is it mythic? Is it just a mythical story? Did the apostles just lie, or did Jesus in fact rise from the dead? It all centers around the empty tomb of Jesus Christ, because we know historically that Jesus was crucified on the cross. He died as a result, and he was buried in a tomb, and that tomb was 3 days later emptied. And the question now is, how was it emptied? Christians have historically always said, ever since the time of the apostles, that Jesus rose from the dead. But of course, this has not been without its counter arguments. And so let us consider the counter arguments. Who could have stolen the body? Who could have removed Jesus from the body? Divine hands or human hands? So the four main candidates for the ones who could have stolen the body out of the tomb is first the Romans, second the Jews, third the disciples, and fourth Joseph of Arimathea. So now let us consider those options. Well, the Romans, they couldn't have stolen the body because what interest did the Romans have in stealing the body of a first century Palestinian Jew? I mean, that is of no interest to the Romans. So that option is out. Well, what about the Jews then? Well, the Jews, they wanted to get rid of Jesus as quickly as possible, so why would they stir up people to thinking many things, possibly thinking that Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, why would they create such trouble by taking his body out of the tomb for no apparent reason, right? And when the apostles, they proclaimed that Jesus rose from the dead, why didn't the Jews, if they had stolen the body and knew where it was now, why didn't they produce it when the apostles claimed that Jesus rose from the dead, so that they could debunk the apostles? They never did that. So the Jews are also a in fact, very unlikely option. Thirdly, it could have been the disciples. Well, people, they tend to die for many things they think is true. Uh, for example, out of deception, because they have been deceived. However, someone who knows that what he's believing is a lie, and he goes and dies for that lie, and many of his fellows, they also go and die for that lie, that's just impossible. I mean, would you die for a lie? If not, then why do you think the apostles would, right? And I mean, 9 out of the 10 apostles, they died, right? Or 10, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Most of them died at the very least as martyrs, right? Paul, he died because he preached the resurrection of Jesus. Peter, he died because he preached the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, only John the Apostle, if I'm not wrong, was the only one who died in peace, although in exile on a distant Greek island. So if they stole the body, why would they go and die for a lie? It can't be the disciples. That's impossible. So the last, actually, the last actual candidate that remains is Joseph of Arimathea, which I think is the only one for whom you could give good reasons for. I'd argue that, but it can also be debunked, right? Because if Joseph really wanted to remove the body from the tomb, why even place it in the tomb to begin with? That just doesn't make sense. But okay, okay, he put it in the tomb, and so what? He couldn't have time to remove the body from the tomb, right? He couldn't have time because the same Friday evening was Sabbath, right? Sabbath. So he couldn't work, so he wouldn't have had time to remove the stone, right? The stone that covered the entrance to the tomb. So he would have buried Jesus, right? Which we know historically, we know that he was buried. He was buried, and then Joseph would have left him, and then he couldn't return because you can't work on a Sabbath, so he wouldn't have worked on that Friday evening, and that follows up until Saturday evening when the Sabbath is over. Would he have had time Saturday evening after the Sabbath was over? No, because that requires too much work. Removing the tombstone, not leaving behind any traces, being silent, um, you know, um, watching your circumstances, not to get busted while you're stealing the body. That would just have been impossible. A dark Saturday evening, right? So he would have had to wait Sunday, right? Sunday, so that he could go and now steal the body when it was light and Sunday. But he couldn't do that because that was when the woman arrived early morning, so he wouldn't have had time. So overall, Joseph would not have had time that weekend to steal the body from the tomb, out of the tomb, right? And if he really did steal the body, why did Joseph leave behind the burial clothes and the burial spices, right? He put the burial spices and the burial clothes in there, right? He placed it in there when he buried Jesus, but he didn't take it with him when he took Jesus's body. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't look like the act of grave robbery here. It doesn't look like that whoever stole the body of Jesus actually stole it, right? And even less, it's even less likely for Joseph because he was actually the one that put the spices and clothes in there. So again, it's unlikely for Joseph of Arimathea to have stolen the body for those reasons. So if the Romans, they didn't steal the body, the Jews, they didn't steal the body, the disciples didn't steal the body, and Joseph of Arimathea didn't steal the body, or in summary, human hands did not remove the body of Jesus, then how was Jesus's body, how was it removed from the tomb? If not by human hands, then by what? By what means? Right? And you can't say, well, maybe he was actually unconscious and then he got his consciousness back, and so no, he actually died on the cross and he was buried. He did die. He didn't go unconscious. He did die, right? So you can't say that either, right? And more than just the question of how the body was removed from the tomb, it's historically certain that the disciples did believe that they had visions of Christ after he died. It's historically certain. We historically know that the disciples, they did believe that. So we have the question of how, if not by human hands, then what removed Jesus' body from the tomb? And we also have the historical certainty of that the disciples really did believe that they saw visions of the risen Christ, that they thought that they really saw him risen, right? So if it wasn't human hands that removed Jesus out of the tomb, then what did it? There is no other option than to say that Jesus broke the laws of nature and that he rose from the dead. And amen to that. Praise be to God that it is true and that we have so much evidence for it. So Jesus, he rose from the dead, since human hands did not remove his body out of the tomb. So that's the resurrection in 9 minutes. And so Jesus ended up proving many things. And one of them is that there's an afterlife. There's a life after death, unlike what atheists want you to believe. There is a life after death because Jesus, he proved it. He died and he rose from the dead, which means that we humans, we can also die and we can also be resurrected to life. Jesus proved that there's an afterlife because he lived an afterlife. So amen to that. That's the resurrection in 9 minutes.